Shalom and Boker Tov. My name is Shaun Levy and I am a cybersecurity consultant for Mimecast. Now, today we're going to look at navigating the cybersecurity threat landscape and some of my predictions for 2023. So Mimecast is a cybersecurity company. We focused on protecting people, protecting communication, and protecting data, and ultimately stopping bad things from happening to good organizations by enabling them to work protected. Now, we've been doing this for about 20 years now. We have around 42,000 customers globally, and these customers utilize solutions such as our email security with targeted threat protection, brand protection, awareness training, as well as much more. I'm going to start off with quite a bold statement, and that's that data breaches are viewed as an even greater risk than climate change, inflation, and even another financial crisis. Now, according to research from Forbes, data breaches are one of the biggest concerns to corporate leaders last year. Insurance giants found that the threat of cyber incidents was the most important global risk facing businesses. This is well ahead of things like climate change, ahead of labor shortages, and even ahead of the possibility of a looming recession. So I want us to have a look at some research. The SOES, or the State of Email Security Report, is a report that we release every year. And this highlights findings over the past 12 months by surveying experts and around 1,700 CISOs across multiple industries, multiple company sizes, and many regions. And what we found is that email continues to rise at 80% of these companies. So email remains the primary form of communication and has no signs of slowing down. In fact, it is only accelerating. So with email being the primary form of communication, it also remains the preferred delivery vehicle for threats, with 3 out of every 4 companies claiming to have experienced an increase in attacks. And we all know that attacks are becoming more sophisticated every day, and 59% have seen this firsthand, and they agree with us. Now, ransomware remains the most prevalent, with 2 out of every 3 companies being infected, and 97% admit to have been a victim of a targeted phishing attack. So in my opinion, the 3 most important stats on this slide are the ones that I've put the red circle around. And what this shows us is that 94% say that Microsoft and or Google security is just not good enough for what they want to achieve. It doesn't provide enough efficacy to deal with the sophisticated threats. Secondly, more and more companies are worrying about their most important data being leaked by malicious insiders, careless insiders, or negligent insiders. And thirdly, on the back of lockdown, where we saw arguably one of the biggest digital transformations in recent history, companies look to adopt more and more collaboration tools to deal with this work from home, for example. But this opened up the door to a whole new bunch of security risks. So while collaboration tools have obviously become a necessity in order for companies to survive, and the adoption of these tools happened at such an accelerated rate, that likely pushed IT strategies and plans a few years way ahead of time. The result would become that IT resources are now scrambling to manage technology and not manage risk. 38% have said that they have seen a rise in the number of attacks due to collaboration tools. 72% think their organization will be damaged by collaboration tool-based attack, and 75% believe that this is a new threat posed by collaboration tools, and it urgently needs to be addressed now. Now, the collaboration tools are more and more important to companies in a post-COVID era. They are absolutely essential, but they are risky at the same time. They've changed the threat surface. They've created loopholes for bad actors. Now, we've seen many examples of this. Zoom bombing. This is where sessions have been hijacked. More and more, we're starting to see weaponized OneNote attachments to gain remote access. We've seen compromises of instant messaging, could be Teams, Slack, WhatsApp, whatever it is. And even a Mimecast discovery, Adobe PDF reader, by the use of something like simple annotations. But still today, the number one attack vector is email. There are many different types of email-borne threats confronting us today, but the three most prevalent are phishing, ransomware, and spoofing. All in all, virtually all of security decision makers have seen an increase in at least one of these types of attacks over the past 12 months, of which the most common is of course, phishing. But ransomware is also on the rise, and this can also pose probably more of an immediate financial problem. 64% have felt compelled to pay ransoms as a result of a ransomware attack. But some of these have never even gotten their data back. And most of these victims also suffered from downtime while trying to remediate and trying to get back to the last known workable state as quickly as possible. Another problem, which is quite easy to solve, is spoofing. Now, an interesting fact, a very small percentage of companies have configured DMARC, which is a basic security configuration to prevent the spoofing of your domain externally. Now, although not always very straightforward to configure correctly, it's very important to have this as part of your security strategy. What we've seen over and over again is bad actors successfully spoof a domain in order to target their company's suppliers, their customers, and so on, acting as their company. But this problem is a double-edged sword. So where DMARC is correctly configured, where it is configured to reject spoofing attempts, attackers are then resorting to impersonating domains, impersonating websites by adding or removing characters to that domain, right? Which is something that DMARC is not designed to detect. Now, it's not just the increase in the amount of attacks, it's also the sophistication and the progression of these attacks that ultimately catch end users off guard. The spoofing and impersonation is a double-edged sword, and this needs to be considered, but it's also often forgotten or it's misunderstood. Now, let me show you an example on the next slide. Now, the objective of spoofing and impersonation from an attacker's perspective is to trick a user into interacting with a malicious email or website by making it seem legitimate from a legitimate source. Spoofing is an imitation of an exact domain. So in this example, abcxyz.com. But it's a spoofing of this domain externally. However, the reply to address is usually something else. Now, DMARC is a framework that is designed to prevent this. An impersonation is the imitation of a similar domain to abcxyz.com, either by changing characters, by removing characters, by changing the high-level domain, or even in a more sophisticated scenario, using things like Punycode or homoglyphs. And I've given you an example here, where we see the first domain with the arrow pointing to it, where we see abcxyz.com. If you look on the bottom left, you can see that it's actually pointing to xn-bc, xyz, etc., etc., tricking that user into thinking that this actually is a legitimate domain. So what does this mean for 2023 in my opinion? Now, with the problem now becoming a boardroom discussion and not just IT, it's also gaining far more coverage globally. With new risks being introduced and an increase in sophistication. Do I see this decreasing? Absolutely not. 33 billion electronic records are expected to be stolen. Cybercrime is expected to cost the world around $8 trillion in economic terms. Okay, this is greater than the GDP of any country except for the US and China. The average cost of a data breach is $4.35 million currently. The average cost in the US is more than double that, right? A lot of this information is also available. So you can go and see what it is for any specific region or country. 13% was the rise in ransomware in 2022. And it takes on average 212 days to detect a data breach and another 75 days to contain it. That's almost a year.
Okay, so what can we do better and how does Mimecast fit in?
So threat actors achieve their objective through tactics so varied that it's become very complex to defend against them. But two things remain constant here. Email is the primary target because it provides access to people. And secondly, simple human mistakes are a factor in almost all successful attacks. Data has become the goldmine, not only because it leads to direct financial loss, but it also opens the door to other networks and systems. So let's walk through a few examples of how the Mimecast system works. So we've taken a layered approach across every aspect of our detection stack to protect companies against malicious and time-wasting emails. We protect around 390,000 email domains every single day. So we're in a very, very good position to be able to do that. Firstly, it allows us to immediately flag those emails that are designed to trick and fool end users via things like targeting, spear phishing attacks, domain hijacking, as well as supply chain and impersonation attacks. And we also inspect around 1.3 billion emails every day. So this provides us with a ton of intel. It allows us to immediately block the vast majority of email threats. It also allows us to continuously optimize our detection engines, as well as our AI and machine learning models. Now that helps us getting smarter about emails that fall into that gray area between safe and malicious. But we also know how difficult phishing links are for most organizations. Mimecast scans around 503 million URLs every month to look for these types of attacks. Every link is rewritten. This is to ensure that it can be inspected for reputational checks, brand verification through AI technology, as well as deep web page scanning every single time that a user clicks on a link. Now, the important thing to note is that each of these checks is performed upon every click by your user. So this is to make sure that protection is ongoing and not just a once-off event. But now let's look at highly evasive attacks like social engineering, like whaling, fileless malware. Now, these attacks can be dangerous because they often don't carry malicious payloads. Detection engines find it very difficult to block these types of attacks. Now, on average, Mimecast sees around 60 million of these attacks every single month. We combine layered detection engines with AI, with social graphing to map email communication patterns to find and detect anomalies or abnormalities which attackers usually take advantage of by bypassing typical security controls. In addition to that, we also focus on ensuring that people are security savvy by virtue of an integrated awareness training offering. For organizations that leverage both email security as well as awareness training, are able to drive down the average of bad clicks by up to 2.7 times. Now, with 4% of rejections across Mimecast originating from legitimate IP addresses and M365 domains, it's also vital to ensure that outbound emails are inspected for malicious content because attackers will also use that as a pivot. Now, you want to make sure that attacks don't spread to your customers and to your supply chain because any scenario like that can be devastating for your brand as well as your reputation. And lastly, with over 100 API integrations to other vendors in your security ecosystem, such as SOARs, SIMs, EDRs, XDRs, firewalls, and so on, we can ensure the better security together by providing a bi-directional share of threat intelligence and prescriptive guidance, ultimately putting everything on the same page and making everything as intelligent as possible. So what are my top 3 predictions going into the year and beyond? Growing vulnerabilities to multiple attacks. So what this means is there are going to be more opportunities to exploit for initial access, using that initial access to create more pivot points, being able to pivot through different systems, different applications until they reach the target. And also the lateral spread of threats with elevated privileges along the way. An increase in old style attacks. So continue to see more of what we're seeing now. And the reason for that is because a lot of these attacks are low cost with very high return on investments. Impersonation attacks or malwareless attacks have the highest percentage of success. And of course, the credential harvesting and account takeover, which is very common, we see all the time. Another quite interesting phenomena that we're seeing at the moment, we're seeing a lot of this, is people on LinkedIn that are posting about their new jobs they've just started. Now, attackers can leverage this by targeting that new starter with impersonated content. And we call this new start phishing. The attacker leveraging things, social media, such as LinkedIn, creating fake job portals, brand impersonations, people impersonations, acting as if they are a vendor or internal to that company. Maybe it's HR who's going to deliver, a welcome pack. And of course, multi-stage malware drops throughout that company. And just a few other predictions on the cybersecurity trends include an increase in the use of AI and machine learning, not just from a company perspective, but also from an attacker's perspective. We're also going to see a greater focus on cloud security, a greater rise in DevSecOps, a lot more connected devices, right? Of course, with people now working remotely, having more tools to their disposal, and of course, an increase in regulations. The more attacks that happen, the more that's costing customers, the more state-sponsored attacks that we're seeing. Obviously, we're going to start seeing an increase in regulations as well. Thank you very much.